Church, and welcome to our event today, Unpacking China's Military Decision-Making Perspectives from the Region. We have a tremendous keynote speaker whom I will introduce in a moment. But first, a few words about NBR. Many of you know us. We're a fiercely independent and nonpartisan policy organization focused exclusively on the Asia-Pacific, with a mission to bring world-class research to bear on the evolving strategic environment in the Indo-Pacific through original policy-relevant research. This research is guided and in many cases conducted by a global network of experts, a strong cadre of which is represented in this project. You'll hear from several of them in a few minutes. And it's just critical for the formation of effective policy that we have the full range of regional perspectives represented. And so we're delighted to have a distinguished set of experts from the United States, Australia, Taiwan, and the Philippines with us here today. And at 11 o'clock in the panel, these experts will explore China's military decision-making and approaches to crisis management from their respective countries' perspectives. They'll examine their country's military's encounters with the Chinese military, the PLA, with a view to understanding how those interactions are impacting the evolving security environment in Asia. And you also learn how these countries individually have attempted to manage and respond to increasingly risky, coercive, and dangerous operational behavior. Now, these insights were consolidated into an NBR special report. Many of you saw it and grabbed a copy for yourselves. If not, please do so on your way out. And they were put together by our principal investigator, Dr. Oriana Skylar Mastro, who is here as well. And you'll hear those perspectives, I said, in a minute. I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, Ambassador Paul Myler, in a minute. But before I do, allow me to thank Dr. Mastro, fellow senior advisor on this project, Dr. Bates Gill, our case study authors who are here, Andrea Chloe Wong, Dr. Yu-cheng Chen, and Mr. Michael Shoebridge, and you'll hear their introductions in a bit as well. And thank you to my NBR colleagues, Audrey Mossberger, Jeremy Rausch, who was this program's project director, and Elena Bone as well. Well, without further ado, it's my privilege to introduce Ambassador Paul Myler. He's the Deputy Chief of Mission for the Australian Embassy here in the United States. Ambassador Myler assumed his current post here in Washington 5 years ago and became DCM, I think, 3 years ago. And he has been here at just a critical time. It's hard to imagine the good fortune that our country and Australia has had in having him here in Washington during this critical time. You remember, it's not quite 3 years ago that AUKUS was introduced, and Paul has played just a central role in helping us get to the point where AUKUS becomes a reality. And he's about to leave us, sadly. If you're following him on social media, you've enjoyed, as I have, his 60-day countdown to his departure. And the technique he's using is to recount what he was doing on that same day 5 years ago. And so yesterday's, or the day before's, the last one, was moving out of the old embassy to your temporary billets in the National Geographic office. And now here we are 5 years later, you're in your brilliant, beautiful new embassy. Anyway, I encourage you to follow him. He's got a distinguished diplomatic career for Australia. He was ambassador to the Russian Federation for 3 years. He's served in important policy and intelligence roles back in Australia. And it's just a privilege to be able to have him here as a guest today to offer some remarks. After he's done, we'll have a few minutes for Q&A, and then we'll get to the panel at 11. So, Ambassador Paul Myler, please come to the podium.
Thanks, Roy, Oriana, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real honour to have the opportunity to speak today. I should say I stand here not because I have anything particularly insightful to say, so labelling this as a keynote speech may have been a bit misleading, but primarily because the Australian government, through our Defence Strategic Grants program, funded the report that we're here to discuss today. Independent analysis to deepen public debate on the most important strategic dilemmas facing us is absolutely key. As democracies, we do this sort of hard work of self-analysis. We subject ourselves to criticism, and as soon as I saw Michael Shoebridge's name on the report, I knew that this report would deliver on that front. Thank you, Michael. As we grapple with the challenging security environment, it may be that we're facing today and unpack the sorts of things that this report has delivered, I thought it would be useful just to reflect on Australia's assessment and changes in assessment of our strategic environment and changes we're making in response to this. So the key transition has been in 2023, the Defence Strategic Review, identifying a new strategic reality for our country. Our region is facing increasing competition on multiple levels, all framed by an intense contest of values and narratives. This has diminished Australia's historical and geographic advantages, and demands a new approach to defending our nation and its national interests. It's critical that our defence strategy and plans keep pace with the rapidly evolving strategic environment. This new strategic reality requires a fundamentally new approach to Australia's defence, one that leverages and coordinates all arms of national power to achieve an integrated approach to our national security. This is why our new National Defence Strategy, released in April 2024, formalises the concept of national defence. National defence is a coordinated whole-of-government and whole-of-nation approach to meet the strategic challenges Australia faces, including the threat of conflict and the prospect of coercion. It harnesses all arms of Australia's national power to establish a holistic, integrated and focused approach to protect our security and advance our interests. It works alongside integrated statecraft, industry resilience, domestic resilience, supply chain resilience, social cohesion, innovation, science and technology, workforce skills and base, and a robust national intelligence community. The concept draws on Australia's innate strengths and unique contributions to the region. These include our status as an influential power, our enduring democratic values, our history of safeguarding international rules and contributing to regional architecture, the strong foundations of our economy and the strength of our partnerships right across the Indo-Pacific. As a key element of national defence, the government is making a generational reinvestment in the Australian Defence Force's posture, capability and structure. This will see the ADF shift from a balanced force designed to respond to a range of contingencies to a focused force designed to address the nation's most significant strategic risks. To focus defence planning, the National Defence Strategy will see a strategy of denial become a cornerstone of defence planning. Australia's strategy of denial aims to deter any conflict before it begins, prevent any potential adversary from succeeding in coercing Australia through force, support regional security and prosperity, and uphold a favourable regional strategic balance. The strategy of denial involves working with the US and key partners to ensure no country attempts to achieve its strategic objectives in the Indo-Pacific through military action. By signalling a credible ability to hold potential adversaries forces at risk, the strategy also seeks to deter attempts to coerce Australia through force. Australia is investing $330 billion through to 2033-34 on capability investment priorities through the Integrated Investment Program for the Integrated Focused Force. That force has been designed to ensure resources are maximised and military capabilities are brought into service as quickly as possible. As our Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles has stated, the optimistic assumptions that guided defence planning after the end of the Cold War are long gone. Our environment is characterised by the uncertainty and tensions of entrenched and increasing strategic competition between the United States and China. Large-scale war has returned to the European continent and conflict is once again gripping the Middle East. This competition is accompanied by an unprecedented conventional and non-conventional military build-up in our region, taking place without strategic reassurance or transparency. The government will remain patient, calibrated and deliberate in its approach to China, cooperating where we can, disagreeing where we must, and engaging in Australia's national interests. That includes challenging China that as it steps up to a larger role globally, it must accept, like all great powers have, that there will be much greater scrutiny of the way it uses its strength and which countries it chooses to partner with. Acceptance of such restraints is the key to any successful and durable international order. As many of you may know, and Roy mentioned, my last international role was as Australian Ambassador to the Russian Federation. At the time when Russia commenced its brutal war against Ukraine over a decade ago now. Russia is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, and yet it has attacked another country and is threatening to use nuclear weapons if it does not get its way. China, also a Security Council member, is the world's second largest economy. It is a great power whose culture, innovation and drive benefits the world in many ways. Its economic rise, facilitated by our shared rules-based order, has raised hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and become a source of economic prosperity for many countries around the world, including Australia. China aspires to regional and global leadership. As my Deputy Prime Minister said at Shangri-La a couple of days ago, there is no indelible hostility to China, but China has a choice to make. It can set a counterexample to that path chosen by Russia, which has made the choice to accept no restraints on its behaviour. China can choose to exercise its power in a way that exhibits the characteristics necessary for our shared prosperity and security. China making clear in word and deed that it does not support the invasion of a sovereign country in violation of the UN Charter, consistent with China's own long-standing and regularly repeated commitment to the Charter's founding principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, would be a huge vote of confidence in Chinese regional and global leadership. Deputy Prime Minister Marles really emphasised this point. Confidence and trust in Chinese intent will be the single most important ingredient to the maintenance of the global rules-based order, and by extension, it will be at the heart of building a stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. All countries must pursue their strategic objectives in a manner that respects the sovereign rights of their neighbours and the obligations imposed by international law. So we are watching China's strategic behaviour and the signal it sends. Actions by Chinese vessels in the West Philippine Sea, such as the use of water cannons and the ramming of Philippine vessels, are a serious escalation of tensions and are inconsistent with UNCLOS and the final and binding 2016 South China Sea arbitration. Likewise, my Deputy Prime Minister noted at Shangri-La that China's behaviour towards Taiwan creates similar concerns. PLA exercises that practice attacks and blockades of Taiwan do not inspire confidence that China prioritises or is planning for a peaceful settlement to the status of this island and its 22 million people. The Australian Navy has also experienced unsafe and unprofessional behaviour by the PLA Navy and PLA Air Force. The great bulk of the PLA's interactions with the ADF are safe and professional, but the size and speed of PLA development means that interactions are occurring much more frequently. and activities the ADF has conducted in the region for decades, safely and consistent with international law, are increasingly contested. The activation of sonar while Australian naval divers were in the water in the East China Sea in November, and the release of flares in the path of a naval helicopter last month posed a serious risk of injury to our personnel while they were enforcing UN Security Council sanctions against North Korea. The NDS makes clear that Australia will continue to raise with China, both privately and in public, destabilising, provocative or unsafe actions by the PLA, China Coast Guard and maritime militia, consistent with efforts to pursue mechanisms to reduce tensions and the scope and reduce the scope for miscalculation. The defence of Australia depends on the security of our wider region. If any country can make the calculation that it can successfully dominate another, the region becomes less stable and the risk of conflict increases. This is about ensuring that no state will ever conclude that the benefits of conflict outweigh the risks. Australia recognises we must take responsibility for our own security, meaning we must grow our own capability to shape, deter and respond. By having strong defence capabilities of our own, working with partners as they invest in their own capabilities, increasing our operational cooperation in the region and developing formal defence agreements and arrangements, we change the calculus for any potential aggressor. Australia will continue to strengthen defence engagement with Indo-Pacific partners, embracing opportunities to support mutual interests, build trust, deepen cooperation and maintain peace, security and prosperity in the region. The alliance with the United States has never been more important given this challenging strategic environment. It's governed by shared interests for a secure, stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific. We are the closest of partners across a broad range of areas, including defence cooperation, foreign policy, development, climate and trade and investment. The alliance will remain central to Australia's security and strategy and continue to increase in importance in coming decades. The alliance, including through the AUKUS capability partnership, increases Australia's ability to protect itself and its interests by providing access to world-leading defence capability and technology, training and combined exercises. With reduced strategic warning time, we need to work together at speed. We are committed to deepening our cooperation bilaterally and with regional partners and institutions to deliver tangible benefits to the Indo-Pacific. Australia's force posture cooperation with the United States will continue to be a key pillar of our activity. As Deputy Prime Minister Myler said to the Parliament last February, successive Australian governments have held the view that a strong and active US military presence in the Indo-Pacific is vital for deterring actions that would threaten the stability and prosperity of the region and the rules-based order on which we rely. At AUSMIN last year, in July, our governments reaffirmed their commitment to deliver the ambitious trajectory of enhanced force posture cooperation across land, maritime and air domains. They also declared enhanced space cooperation as a new area of cooperation. And I spend most of my time spruiking Surf West in Perth, which is in another 1,000 days we'll see 4 US Navy Virginia-class submarines rotating out of Perth. Australia is an active contributor to a regional strategic balance that keeps the peace. We are working to shape an open, stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific where sovereignty and internationally agreed rules and norms are respected. Strategic competition is not just about major powers competing for primacy. Rather, it is about the way the region works. We all have a role to play in shaping the type of region we want to live in. We are deploying all tools of our national power to this end, building regional resilience to coercion, listening carefully and offering choices, economic development and security that respond to regional priorities and contribute to regional security. We are also deploying Australia's statecraft and influence to minimise the risk of strategic competition spilling into conflict. Australia consistently encourages dialogue, transparency and practical measures to reduce the risk of conflict. We also want to see restraint from destabilising and provocative actions, adherence to international law, as well as ongoing genuine diplomatic engagement alongside open and reliable channels of communication. Thank you. Now the hard part.
We have a couple minutes before the panel. That's one of the more amazing speeches I've heard since I've been in Washington.
That worries me because it'll get me in trouble if it's an amazing speech.
Well, in the sense that it's both a benediction on your time here, but also a summary of where we are in our bilateral relationship. You know, we typically talk about and celebrate 100 years plus of mateship, right? Our soldiers have fought together in every war for the last century. But we've reached an inflection point. I think it started on July 1st, 2019, when you arrived in Washington. Others might say the strategic environment played a big role as well. However we parse the reasons, it does feel like we're at a new stage in this bilateral relationship. You talked about integrated investment, integrated supply chains, the new defense review, which deepens Australian-US cooperation. You made a passing allusion to 1,000 days from now, Virginia-class subs will be in Perth. As you reflect on these changes, is this a natural evolution? Is it purely a response to the external environment? You talked about China, and we'll talk more about it in the panel. Are there other factors? It's just remarkable, and it feels to me that we should acknowledge this moment and understand how we got here. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Paul.
Well, that's a challenging question, Roy. I'm pretty sure it had nothing to do with me being here, but I think you are right. If I think back, so it's about 1,000 days because I've made about 1,000 speeches on it being about 1,000 days of AUKUS. But it's been about 3 years since we birthed AUKUS into the public as essentially a signal of political will by 3 leaders. There wasn't that much substance to it at that stage. It was just like, we are going to do this. And the core of what we were announcing was we had the political will to do it, because if you announced it and then you didn't do it or failed to do it, then not only do you not get the deterrence value of doing it, but you actually undermine your deterrence posture. So that was an enormous moment of political will. Obviously, that was driven by changing strategic environments and changing assessments of what Australia needed and where we would need to go with our defence force. But it was underpinned by, I think, a crystallisation of this sort of long-standing, shared values and trust and the like. But when we talk about trust, I mean, I think over the period that I've been here, the level of trust between Australia and the United States has just gone through the roof. And we've had any number of different political partnerings. When I started, we had conservative governments in both, or centre-right governments in both countries. Then it was transition to the Biden administration, centre-left, centre-right, and then now we're both centre-left, and in the future, lots of changes, not necessarily natural political, ideological partners on a whole range of things, but underpinning it, that sense that when something happens in the world, US counterparts can pivot and say, Australia, you've got this, we're just going to be over here for a little while, is extraordinary. It would be great if we, it would be great if we were in a slightly more benign strategic environment, but given that we are going through a period where the sharpening of different views of the sort of globe we want to live in, the different philosophical and governing visions are out there, it has really consolidated our collaboration. And, we are, well, I mean, my predecessors have been fighting for ITAR reform for, 40 years. We've had multiple different attempts at it. They always fail. And, a year ago, I was still being told by lots of people in this town and quite a few in Canberra that we weren't going to get there. And, now we've got, fundamental reform of export controls to build this sort of ecosystem of defence capability development that encompasses the UK, Australia and the US. And I can't think of a better group of people that you'd want to be doing advanced defence capability development with.
What's, I think, fitting and reflective of your points that the Australian Department of Defence commissioned an American Policy Research Institute to lead this study, as you mentioned. And yet, as we respond to this strategic environment, we were just in Australia 2 weeks ago, briefing out the report to a variety of audiences in Canberra and Sydney. And of course, in democracies, how our domestic polities respond to both their government's messaging and to their understanding of the regional environment are essential. And I would say it would be inaccurate to say we heard a unanimous perspective on how to respond to the regional security challenges that the Chinese face. You have told me, reflecting back on AUKUS, that the hard work, you said there's no structural impediments to AUKUS anymore. I don't remember when you told me this. Our ITAR being a big one at that moment. But the hard work is the work we do in our domestic polities now to make this happen. Any last reflections on this point as you think about both your own country and what you've observed here? And you have 45 seconds to respond to that very simplistic question.
Okay. Well, look, I think one of the things that is quite extraordinary is the way in which the Australian public have come on a journey with the government over the last longer than 5 years, say 10 years, to a position where you can announce something like AUKUS, and yes, there's some dissent, but have pretty overwhelming consensus that it was the right thing to do. That's sort of quite extraordinary in a way. And yes, there'll be some criticism at the margins, and everybody has views on how to do it and the like. And we haven't really got into the national enterprise end of things, where we really have to have, as a whole of nation, a lift to take on the stewardship and the custodial responsibilities of nuclear propelled submarines. And it is going to be a big national project, and we see it in concept, but implementation is going to be, a challenge. But at this stage, I was back in Perth last month for 3 weeks, and there was a remarkable level of support, which a decade ago I wouldn't have seen. So it's, the strategic environment, what we've experienced, some of the economic coercion that we were put through, some of the political interference we've seen, all of these things have positioned Australia and the Australian public to an understanding an alignment with the government on the changes that have occurred in their strategic environment. And we've done that with, a large ethnically Chinese population from a whole range of different eras of migration. So doing that, bringing that shared political consensus in a way that was respectful of our multicultural origins and all of the communities within it has been really a credit to lots of people with their shoulder to the wheel on this. That was longer than 45 seconds.
That was great. Ambassador Paul Myler, it's been our privilege to have you here in Washington representing your country, and thank you for joining us today as well. Please join me in thanking Ambassador Myler.
Thank you.
We're now going to welcome up the panel, moderated by my MBR colleague, Vice President for Research, Ali Sowinski.
So we're going to take one quick second to get a mic swap. So if you'll bear with us for a minute here, we'll have our wonderful panel join us here on the stage. Yeah, I think so. Let's do, if you guys want to shift Oriana here, and then Bates.
Let's do
I'll ask you to sit there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Should have coordinated that ahead of time.
All right.
And then Michael.
Oh, okay.
It's the
I
order
didn't
they
realize
gave
you had such particular plans.
That way I can just run down the
Good.
row. Yeah. Perfect. All right, thanks for bearing with us. That was pretty seamless, I think. So as Roy mentioned, I'm Ali Sowinski. I'm the Vice President for Research at the National Bureau of Asian Research. And it's really my pleasure to follow that wonderful opening set of remarks and discussion with a fantastic panel of experts here, all of whom have contributed and been key members of the project and the report that we're going to discuss here today. So the way we're going to run this is I'm going to introduce each of our panelists here and ask them to kind of lay out a few opening remarks, give us some food for thought. And we do have, quite a few folks here, so we'll ask them to keep it brief, 4 minutes or so. And then once they've each had a chance to offer a few thoughts, we'll turn it over to you all for Q&A. So we'll start here on my left and go down the row. So Dr. Oriana Skylar Mastro served as this project's principal investigator and led the project. And as was mentioned before, this group also has just been in Australia and will be able to incorporate some of the discussions and feedback and findings from both the report and some of the conversations we had there as we go through this. So Dr. Mastro is a Center Fellow at the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University, where her research focuses on Chinese security policy, Asia-Pacific security issues, war termination, and coercive diplomacy. She is also a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and has published widely with a new book, Upstart, How China Became a Great Power, due to be released in just...
On Monday.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Not even, I was going to say a few weeks, but
Yeah.
okay, next week. So Oriana, you tie together in the kind of opening part of this report, you tied together several themes from the project in your introduction, ranging from China using these encounters to test the resolve of other countries and dissuade them from taking provocative actions, to the role of domestic politics and the wide variety of approaches taken by the countries that we've looked at to publicizing these encounters. So from your standpoint, could you elaborate a little more on what you see to be the most important findings revealed in the report?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. And thank you all for coming today. It's been a real pleasure to work with this team on this report. My main interests are in China military issues and coercive diplomacy, so it fell right in line with the things I'm passionate about. I would say that I always tell a story of my passion for the PLA was so strong that on my first date with my husband, I brought him a newly edited like Strategic Asia from NPR that was about PLA modernization. And I thought this would surely sell him on the point because I think I got it before anyone else did. And I was like, look how special, we can talk about Air Force modernization. And he was
such
like,
a romantic.
he was like, that's a very strange present to bring someone, but you know, it worked. And so my passion for the PLA and for Australia, my husband's Australian, it was really a pleasure to be a part of this project. Let me just say there's sort of three big takeaways. There's some things that are certain and that I'm really confident in terms of findings from this report. And then I think this report also raised some critical new questions that we have been discussing and contemplating with our colleagues in Australia as well as Washington, D.C. that I'll bring out to the floor. So the first point perhaps seems like an obvious one, but I think it's still important to state, which is when you looked at all of these cases of the encounters that the Philippines and Vietnam and India and Taiwan and Australia had all had with the PLA, we have to have the takeaway that it's not one country, it's not one entity that is experiencing this, but instead it is obvious and it's very clear at this stage after years and years of Chinese coercive diplomacy that this is a deliberate strategy on the part of the Chinese to use the PLA in dangerous ways to increase risk of operations to other entities in the area. And in a gray zone fashion, but also in the case of Taiwan, I'm sure our panelists will talk a bit about that, in a more traditional military way to try to signal to the region that there is no hope of resistance. And I do like to remind people that in the Chinese conception of deterrence, it's not just preventing countries from using force, it is undermining their will to resist. They want all the countries represented in these case studies to say, okay, we're better off accommodating whatever China wants than to put up a fight. So the first takeaway is that it's very clear now. We have so many data points, and the aggregation of these case studies, I think, makes it exceptionally clear that this is a region-wide strategy. And given that, this desire to convince countries to give up the will to resist, another key takeaway of this report was looking at how countries have responded. And the balance that different countries have chosen between getting closer to the United States and building up their own military capabilities. And very interestingly, in political science, we think of those as separate choices and either or. But what we see in reality is the countries like Australia that have chosen to be even closer to the United States, or Japan, are also the countries that have chosen to invest even more in their militaries. And so those things have gone hand in hand. As the ambassador mentioned, it's no longer this view of, oh, the United States will take care of this or that, but we are all capable partners that have to work together. Because this is a regional problem, the only solution will be a regional solution. In terms of the questions or things for discussion that I found very interesting coming out of this report are the big issues that I think color all the debates we have on how to deal with some of the more problematic activity coming out of China. And that the first one is what types of behaviors will deter China and what types of behaviors will provoke China. And in the report, we have this discussion, and I often bring up the example of whether or not to publicize these types of events. There's differing opinions about it. The report shows different approaches, and that's also one of the real values added, is that you have all these different cases. So we have that aggregation of data, and we can look at what worked for some countries and maybe have lessons learned for others. But this is something we talked very extensively about in Canberra. Depending on which office you're in, they have different views of where that line is. I would say it's the exact same in the United States. We were briefed at the State Department yesterday. I very rarely make it to the State Department. I spend most of my time at the Pentagon. I think at the Pentagon, that line is very different than where it is at the State Department. But it's something that has to be determined and discussed, because when China is deterred, they're not going to be happy. Right? You're constraining China's choices. So it's not necessarily that those are the same thing, that, oh, then it's provocative and they escalate. Obviously, deterrence is also about imposing caution. So with the panelists today, that's one thing that I think it's very useful to discuss. And then the final finding was about, obviously the need for this military buildup to deter, but complementing that with more extensive diplomatic activities in the region, not only to enhance the connectivity between the nations there that we all face these common concerns, to strengthen some of the norms in the region, but also in a reassurance effort to China to create the impression, which might be theoretical, but I think still important. The problem with China is their behavior. It is not China. And it is theoretically possible that if China changed their strategic outlook and their approach, that there would be more than enough room in Asia for both of us. And so that is an important, I think, final finding of the report. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Oriana. All right, so next we'll turn to Dr. Gill, who is a senior fellow in Asian security with NBR. I've had the great privilege to work with on a number of NBR projects for the past 4 or 5 years maybe, and was wonderful to have him join us on this project as a senior advisor. And he is also a non-resident policy fellow with Asia Society Australia, among many other distinguished titles, and the author of 12, I didn't realize it was that many, 12 books on China and Asia-related topics. So Bates, as I mentioned, you've led several NBR studies over the past few years that examine how countries in the Indo-Pacific are responding to China's military modernization. And an important question underwriting this particular study that we undertook is how the United States can deepen its coordination among these countries that we examined to uphold regional prosperity and enhance collective deterrence. So can you talk a little bit more about what this project reveals about each country's concerns towards the PRC's coercive behaviors and the prospects for deepening that coordination to deter China from carrying out these activities?
Thanks so much, Ali, and let me also extend my gratitude to the National Bureau of Asian Research and to the Government of Australia for its support for this project. It's been a real pleasure working with you, Oriana, on this and with the whole team. Unfortunately, it was not possible to bring the other contributing authors from Vietnam and India and Japan to Washington this time around, but I want to stress for everyone who hasn't had a chance yet to look at the study that its unique impact and great value, I think, is found in the work that NBR is so good at, and that is reaching out to its regional network and bringing together these diverse perspectives on pressing strategic challenges in the region. And while NBR is just a think tank, I think it's made an enormous contribution in building a greater sense of community, a greater sense of consensus around the challenges that the region is facing, and that's exactly what this report does. I'm not aware of any other public study to date that is doing what Oriana has done with this team, and that is bringing 6 different perspectives, all with a shared concern about increasingly dangerous encounters with the PLA, and getting them to find where there's common ground and a desire for collective response, but also revealing, as you suggested, Ali, where there still are differences and difficulties in trying to bring about that collective action. So while the study, I don't think, lands squarely on a distinct set of what can be done, I think its real value is getting the conversation initiated, which is just so critical. What I found in looking across the various case studies is that each country has its own distinct set of domestic politics and its own distinct set of bilateral relations with China that are going to affect and shape how they are willing to respond in a collective way. And we'll hear from some of the case studies with regard to that. And of course, across many of these countries, with democratic systems, means that governments are going to change from time to time, and they might dramatically change with regard to their individual approaches toward China. So that, just from the start, automatically creates challenges for any effort to try to develop any kind of collective response to China. But I think the groundwork is being made, and there are bases for consensus. As Oriana has mentioned, I think what's really, really important, and I think we were able to deliver this message quite strongly in Canberra last month, is the recognition that these are not individual problems. These challenges are shared across the different countries, and that in itself ought to be able to establish a foundation for the possibilities for collective action. And we're seeing, in response, I think, precisely to the challenges that China is posing, the beginnings of more collective responses, whether that is through the AUKUS partnership, for example, or through the so-called Squad cooperation amongst Japan, Australia, the United States, and the Philippines. And obviously there are other examples. So the possibilities for collective action are clear and in response to China's challenges. One idea we've generated from these conversations is the need then going forward to make more public, to make more clear and transparent that this is not a problem that only the Philippines is facing, or only Japan is facing, or only India, but is in fact a problem that virtually every one of China's neighbors is increasingly feeling. And that there, I think, then arises the possibility to carry this conversation forward and make more clear and transparent and hold China more responsible for what are increasingly dangerous and risky behaviors. You know, I think we need to be much clearer in our conversations directly with China on a government-to-government basis, but also through the sort of more public actions of think tanks and scholars to make clearer than ever to our Chinese counterparts that this clearly more risk-acceptant behavior by the government and the military of China is dangerous and puts lives and military personnel at risk. I am very sorry to think that if this sort of behavior continues, we are going to see, unfortunately, the loss of life. And this is something that apparently Beijing has already calculated is possible. Otherwise, why would they engage in this type of behavior? So we're dealing with a country and a military that apparently believes that in the pursuit of its ambition, it's okay if lives are lost in the process. That's what we're dealing with here. And I think we need to make that clear in our conversations with our Chinese counterparts, that that simply is not something we're prepared to accept, nor do we believe that that is the behavior of a responsible great power in the Indo-Pacific. But I want to leave it to our case study participants to delve into more detail on how they've experienced in their interactions with the PLA this increasingly dangerous and challenging sets of behaviors.
That's a perfect segue as we turn to, as Bates mentioned, 3 of the case study authors, because that'll allow us an opportunity to look at some of the examples that we've been talking about, dangerous behavior, encounters, you know, what exactly does that look like and what does that mean? This set of authors, as well as those in the report, allow us to really kind of get a grasp on what those look like and what we're talking about when we're talking about these dangerous encounters and behaviors. So first, we'll turn to Mr. Michael Shoebridge, who is the founder and director of Strategic Analysis Australia and has spent his career working in Australia's policy, intelligence, and project delivery sectors. Previously, he was the director of the Defence Strategy and National Security Program at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and also worked in multiple government roles with the Australian government, including as the head of the Defence Intelligence and Research Coordination Division in the Prime Minister's Department, and as the Deputy Director of Australia's Defence Intelligence Organisation. So, we've spent some time talking about Australia already this morning. So we know that Australia has been one of the countries that is most frequently confronting the PLA in the air and maritime domains, or rather the PLA is confronting Australia in these domains. So the challenge I imagine for you was selecting a specific encounter amongst many options to kind of narrow in on in the report. And you chose the incident where the PLA activated its sonar and injured Australian divers who were untangling a fishing net from the propeller of a Royal Australian Navy frigate back in 2023. So can you talk a little bit about that case, that example, as well as how the frequency of the ADF's encounters with the PLA is shaping thinking in Canberra regarding China's increasingly assertive regional behavior?
Sure, Ellen. What a pleasure to be a part of this report. It's all very friendly up here, but I can tell you Oriana and Bates are both very hard taskmasters, so we worked hard to get this report done, but it's a pleasure to have been part of it. And also, a report only has any value if people read it and think about what it says. So thank you all for being here and attending this. I'm hoping there's going to be some really good discussion, so thank you in advance. Anyway, Australians are very self-obsessed people. So when we look at Chinese military aggression against Australia, we like to think it's all about us. It must be our behaviour that's causing this. But that's not the case, unfortunately. So we had one theory was the former government, the Morrison government back in Australia, had some quite hard-edged China policies, excluding Chinese companies from the 5G network, passing foreign interference laws to limit Chinese interference in our political decision-making, calling for an international inquiry into the origins of the COVID pandemic, and of course AUKUS, trying to tip the military balance away from China through some very powerful deterrent weapons. But it turns out this dangerous behaviour is happening under the new government, which has got a much different policy of re-engagement with China, stabilisation that's been quite successful in the diplomatic and economic realms. And so the dangerous behaviour has been happening under the former government's policy and under the new government's policy. I'll give you 4 examples. May 2022, an Australian P-8 maritime patrol aircraft in the South China Sea had chaff released in front of it, sucked into its engines from a Chinese jet fighter. That could have caused our aircraft to crash and kill the crew on board. In November 22, in the Arafura Sea, just off the coast of Darwin in Australia, a PLA warship used its military laser targeting on another maritime patrol aircraft of ours, which again could have caused the aircraft to crash and kill the crew on board by dazzling the pilots. And then in November 2023, last year, the incident I focus on in the report, our frigate HMAS Toowoomba was disabled, had fishing nets tangled in its propellers. We had divers in the water trying to make it safe. Normally, another vessel that encounters a vessel that's disabled renders assistance. The PLA warship did the opposite. It used its powerful sonar on the diver in the water, injuring the Australian diver who was trying to make the vessel safe. And then just this May, just as the report was released, the Chinese military released flares in front of an Australian Navy helicopter in the Yellow Sea that was part of a UN sanctions mission against North Korea, a mission that the Chinese have signed up to. Again, risking the death of the aircrew on our helicopter. So it's not a bilateral issue, unfortunately, much as we tell ourselves, and maybe it was a result of previous policy. And as you'll see with the report, it's happening in India, to Japanese encounters with the PLA, Vietnamese encounters with the PLA, Philippines encounters, Canadian encounters, American encounters, and Australia. So can't be approached as a bilateral issue. We told ourselves, is it because we're operating in close proximity or in areas of core interest to China? Well, I just gave you a short list that tells you no. So these dangerous encounters with the PLA have happened in the Yellow Sea, the East China Sea, the South China Sea, and the Arafura Sea close to Australia. So it's not about proximity. It's about how the PLA is behaving. Our policy of stabilisation, as I say, it stabilised the economic and diplomatic relationship, enabled ministerial and leader-level engagement to happen, but it has not stabilised the security relationship. So we have not got a stable relationship with China. The big motive, I think, is Beijing wants to push other militaries out of the region and make it harder for them to operate there. And the point Bates made about the Beijing leadership, so from Xi Jinping down, contemplates the PLA's dangerous behaviour, killing other military people and causing damage and death. So this is an active, directed policy from the highest levels of Beijing. It's not a few captains and pilots on a frolic. This is too sustained over too long a period for that to be the case. And so these aren't about unsafe, unprofessional encounters. This is about deliberate, dangerous behaviour, contemplating death and destruction for the other military. And my assessment in the chapter is the path that the region is on is one of increasing incremental Chinese control through this policy of dangerous behaviour, because it pushes everyone away. It makes other countries want to de-escalate at all costs, because for us to have an Australian aircraft and its crew crash and the crew killed is a crisis. But if that were to happen, I don't think Beijing would feel it was a crisis. It's a crisis they're inflicting on the other country. So reversing this, if this isn't a bilateral problem, has to be something that is about collective action. And rather than thinking about doing this everywhere, all the time, all at once, across the huge Indo-Pacific, there are key places where Chinese policy and action has to be shown to fail, and that has not happened in the last 10 years. To me, an obvious place to show that Chinese policy and action to get incremental control will fail is at Second Thomas Shoal right now, where that rusting Philippines vessel needs to be replaced. And it can be replaced. Imagine towing a disused oil and gas facility there, parking it there as a new collective facility to assert Philippine sovereignty and protect it collectively with the squad, Philippines, Australia, Japan, and the US. That would be a direct assertion of the kind of region we want to see, where countries' sovereignty and territorial integrity is upheld, the UNCLOS arbitral tribunal ruling is upheld, and countries act together to pursue the kind of region we want to live in. But unless we do things that cause Chinese policy and action to fail, we are leaving all the leverage with Beijing, and we are waiting for our servicemen and women to be killed by the PLA. And that's not the future that I want. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. We'll turn next to Dr. Yu-cheng, who is an associate professor at the Graduate Institute of China Military Affairs Studies at the National Defense University in Taiwan. He is also a senior research fellow at the Center for Contemporary China Studies and a research fellow at the Center for Japan and Korea Studies. He's published on PLA affairs and regional security, and we're going to talk a little bit about Taiwan here, which I think is an interesting turn from talking about Australia, because we noted Australia has faced a number of these dangerous encounters. But Taiwan is certainly noteworthy in that it is under near constant pressure and military coercion from Beijing, some of which will result in dangerous encounters and otherwise is intended to really put pressure on and coerce Taiwan into taking certain behaviors. It's really been a defining feature, especially over the past few years. So your paper, you examined the PLA joint sword exercises, which took place in April of last year following Tsai Ing-wen's meeting with Speaker McCarthy. So talk to us a little bit about why those exercises were notable and your thoughts on the recent drills that we've just observed following President Lai Ching-te's inauguration.
Thank you, Alice. And this is the first time to DC, so it's a great privilege to be here. And I think just like all the experts just mentioned, of course, this is a very exciting to participate in this extremely team and NBR, as well as I can share from the Taiwan's perspective to all the global stage. I think this is a good way to share our voice to all of you. So thank you for kind of introduction, Alison. And I think I pick up this case study for a couple of reasons, and the motivation behind this research I to do is increasing on how to understand the Chinese military maneuvers in their implications for this regional security, particular for Taiwan and entire regional situation. So I pick up the interesting concept from the Chinese perspective. Is about the strategic deterrence. Of course, this chapter I just more focus on how the military deterrence in this concept. So I just try to make some compare not only 2023 Nancy Pelosi visit to Taiwan, after that the big large scale to Taiwan, but also I just follow to pick up to point out all the military maneuvers, especially for Taiwan, is focusing on how Taiwan's international stage is more important in the international stage. So let's PLA follow the Xi Jinping's strategic thinking that they have to do something and push Taiwan society and the Taiwan's government. So this is my motivation to pick up. Fortunately, that I just pick up the large scale maneuver is quite different than other experts in our case study. So I'm lucky guy to show another approach to the audience. So the choice of the joint soul last year is a particular significant for several reasons. Firstly, it's illustrate that the PLA's involving tactics and response to the high-profile international interaction involving Taiwan, such as I mentioned that former President Tsai Ing-wen meeting with Kevin McCarthy. So this exercise directed in reacting to perceive the provocation from the Beijing's readiness to use a large-scale military drill as a mean that signal the strategic intent and the deterrent capabilities. So such an exercise provide a very valuable lesson on PLA's operational readiness and its approach to regional deterrence. In terms of this, my case study demonstrated a very significant military capability and several limitations as well. So despite the extensive display of air and naval power, this exercise revealed logistic challenges and limitations in sustained operational capacity. So I think moreover, we see the exercise primarily focus on conventional deterrence and the lack of the integration of a more advanced asymmetric warfare technology, and which is this limitation suggests that all the scholars that can point out how PLA is capable right now. So there is a critical gaps from the PLA right now, such as operational readiness and the capacity to sustain very long-term and continuing showing their military engagements. So how to Taiwan to react and to deal with this military drill? So Taiwan recent years enhanced our resilience, defense resilience, and strategic foresight for defense posture. So, for example, enhancing our asymmetric warfare capabilities and focusing on the leveraging advanced technology and innovative tactics to counter the PLA conventional superiority. So the Taiwan, we also robust the civilian defense mechanism and continuance to ensure that both in the military and our civilians, moreover, the most important thing in my chapter that I also suggest that commendation of the China military exercise by United States and other countries underscores the international community's the commitment to peace and the stability in the region. So the military assistance and the strategic support provided to Taiwan is very important. Of course, the United States is the most supported to Taiwan for military training, and especially recent year. So Taiwan defense capability and contribute a balance of power in the Indo-Pacific region to deterring and show our determination to our partnership and to change the to deter the Chinese government to change the status quo by force. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chen. All right, so finally, we'll turn to Dr. Andrea Chloe Wong, who's a non-resident research fellow at the Institute for Indo-Pacific Affairs in Christchurch, New Zealand. She holds a PhD in political science from the University of Canterbury and previously served as the Senior Foreign Affairs Research Specialist at the Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies of the Foreign Service Institute in the Philippines. So I really like that we've had an opportunity to talk a little bit about the kind of various instances and interactions that Australia has had with the PLA, the kind of constant interactions that Taiwan is dealing with, and the major military exercises, because the Philippines offer us a different slice. And as Michael has already previewed, with Second Thomas Shoal in particular, I imagine is very salient in a lot of the conversations and things that our colleagues here today will be interested in. For you, this ongoing standoff at Second Thomas Shoal between the China Coast Guard and Filipino vessels that are attempting to conduct resupply missions on the Sierra Madre, it's really grabbed headlines in the United States in ways that has not in previous instances where there have been conflicts around Second Thomas Shoal. Your case study, though, gave us another look at one of those at the time headline grabbing, but has since kind of fallen to the back burner issues of the standoff at Scarborough Shoal in 2012. So talk to us a little bit why you chose that case study, as well as how the legacy of the 2012 standoff might be shaping present-day dynamics between China and the Philippines at Second Thomas Shoal.
Right. The reason why I chose this case, the Scarborough Shoal incident in 2012, is because I believe that it marked a turning point in Philippine-China relations, which eventually poisoned the overall bilateral relationship between Philippines and China. So during the standoff, China displayed reactive assertiveness and further escalated the crisis, which led to China's exercise of de facto control in the area. It used perceived provocations as a chance to change the status quo in its favor by flexing its military muscle, exercising diplomatic maneuvering, and the display of its economic might as much as it can, all the while insisting that the Philippines started the conflict. The standoff proves that China's reactive assertiveness and escalation strategy are meant to win a conflict rather than preventing or resolving it. So although the standoff occurred more than a decade ago, the Scarborough Shoal incident was the major start of a recurring trend in China's overbearing display of its maritime claims in the South China Sea. So based on that, I have just two takeaways about the Philippines and China. First, about China. So my sense is that with that incident, China's gray zone tactics proves that it will continue. So aside from the Scarborough Shoal incident, we can see now that China is aggressive as it continues to harass Filipino fishing vessels, Philippine Coast Guard during its resupply mission in the Second Thomas Shoal. And then secondly, another takeaway about the Philippines is that given this Chinese harassment at sea, what is interesting about the Philippines is that it suffers from policy inconsistencies every time there is a change in presidential administration every 6 years. So during the Scarborough Shoal incident, it was during the administration of Benigno Aquino III. He was very defiant against China. That is the reason why he filed the arbitration case in 2012. And then after his term ended, we have Rodrigo Duterte, who set aside the arbitration victory of the Philippines in favor of gaining economic investments from China. But given that the harassment continues and the Philippines continues to face threats from China, the current Marcos administration is very vigilant with publicizing persistent Chinese threat in the South China Sea, exploring other strategic partnerships. Aside from our alliance with the US, we are deepening partnership with Australia and Japan. And also at the same time, we are also building maritime capabilities to at least have a minimum credible defense posture against China. So that is just my 2 takeaways about the Philippine case.
Wonderful. And thank you guys for keeping those. There's so much that we could touch on and explore, and we've managed to, I think, provide enough of a snapshot of each of the topics and issues you all have covered so that our audience can pick at them a little bit further for Q&A. So we have about 18 minutes, give or take, for Q&A. So we have a mic here at the front of the room, and if you have a question, we're going to ask that you just come up to the mic, and we can have a few folks waiting in line if multiple people have questions. So if you have a question, please go ahead and come up to the front here, and we'll take them in the order that you race up to the front in.
Hi, my question relates to...
You introduce yourself
sorry.
first. I didn't say it, so yeah.
Hi, my name's Ted Tyler. I'm with Stand Together Trust. I wanted to see if the panel could talk a little bit about how maybe capabilities could be produced. It seems like one of the conclusions is the United States, or maybe the partners and allies, need more capabilities. And so does the US possess the industrial capacity to do this? Do other countries? I know like Taiwan, there's a huge weapons backlog of things they've purchased from the United States. So how does this maybe happen from a capacity standpoint? Thank you.
Thank you.
I can start weighing in on that. So let me just say before I go into my answer that a lot of my other work, like I am all about force posture and increasing U.S. force posture, in particular in the Indo-Pacific. But I would say that I feel like these particular issues about the dangerous encounters aren't really about U.S. capabilities, but or even allies and partners' capabilities to a degree, but it's more about this risk calculus and the unwillingness of our governments to accept a higher level of risk to engage. Now, maybe you would think there's some sort of direct correlation, like if we were more capable, maybe we'd be more risk acceptant, but I don't really see that. I mean, if you look at the variation between how the U.S. responds, how Australia responds, it doesn't really seem like, you know, the bigger U.S. military, we are more risk acceptant than like the Philippines, for example. So the Taiwan case is somewhat unique in that I don't think the PLA's behavior would be changed at all. Maybe they would be less confident that this type of military coercion would work in the Taiwan case because they're trying to convince the people of Taiwan there is no hope of defense. So that's slightly different. But generally speaking, I think the problem is that we tend to de-escalate when confronted with these risks and these provocations on the part of China, and that's what leads to their success in engaging with them. So I was at the Pentagon all day yesterday. One of the great things I had to do is reinstitute my Pentagon building access. So I was sitting in the office, and they had a big thing on the wall that said risk. And then below it, and I'll leave you with this anecdote, it said, ships in the harbor are safe, but that's not what ships were built to do. And so that's where I think the fundamental problem comes. It's how we use our militaries, not so much at this stage with these encounters, what we have. I'll pass it on to...
I absolutely agree, but I think back to this point, it's not a bilateral Australia-China or Philippines-China issue. Trying to see it as an individual country like Australia or the Philippines or Taiwan taking on the PLA then it becomes very much a capability and force overmatch problem. But that's why collective effort is so important. So think about how difficult it is for China to confront 4 nations cooperating with capabilities we all have. My thought about this question is the capability we're lacking is an understanding that we have a failed approach. China is making increasing incremental gains under our current approach and risk settings. So unless we change that, we should expect China to increase its incremental control. If we want to change that, we need to change what we do, and that's really not about a future capability question.
So my understanding is that Taiwan, our government and our civilians group, and we are trying to share and establish more mechanism to share the more about the PLA coercion and the aggressive behavior recent years. In these days and the last month, we went to Australia, also share other perspective to our counterpart and to share different countries' counter action. Especially in Taiwan, I always share that Taiwan, in recent year, we try to dig more detailed information, not only from the governmental system, but also there are more and more young generation, not only the scholar, but also very provocative and ambitious young generation. The people, they want to share more information to our global society. So this is the first way that to create more and more detail that the Taiwan's people and the Taiwan's society know, wow, this is really thrill, not only to Taiwan, but also the entire regional security threat. So in Taiwan, right now we are doing this way approach. Thank you.
So we have enough of a lineup here that I'm going to take.
Jump through it.
Yeah, I'm going to take 2 at a time. So I'll ask Ken to give his question, and then before you all respond, we'll take the next question, and then we can see whoever wants to respond to each of those, take them as they come. Introduce yourself.
Ken Allen, independent consultant. I looked at the title and said, Unpacking Chen's Military Decision Making. I was expecting you to talk about the Central Military Commission. So the basic question I have is this: who's telling who to do what? Is it Xi Jinping telling everybody what to do? Is it the CMC? And the CMC, the Minister of Defense isn't even on there for the last 6 months. They took all the service commanders off in 2017 at the party committee. So who's telling these, the 4 things you mentioned, who's telling the Navy what to do? Is it the Headquarters Navy, which now has command authority taken away? Southern Theater Command, Southern Command Navy, I won't go into either. But where does the CMC fit into all this? And who's telling who to do what? Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Great question.
My name is Bo Yang. I'm a contractor. So my first question is for Dr. Oriana. Recently, both Trump and Biden seem to suggest in one way or another that U.S. military intervention is on the table if China attacks Taiwan. So I know that you are against the idea of strategic clarity. So what's your biggest concern for strategic clarity? And my second question is that what does the panel make of the theory of China create Taiwan contingency as a diversionary war? Thank you.
I'll start. I'll let some people delve a little bit more into the CMC and things, but I will say that, you know, the first finding is trying to hit at home at this, which given the amount of coordination and patterned behavior across PLA forces, the one thing we can say very certainly is that this is a deliberate strategy that is being communicated from the top down. Now, if we want to get into a discussion about the degree of control that Xi Jinping has over other people on the CMC, I mean, I think it's been pretty obvious since the 2013 reorg that that it's no longer first among equals type of situation. I would just clarify to say that there's a difference between authorization and coordination. I don't think that, this pilot calls over to Xi Jinping before he releases like chaff and flares and things, but those types of rules of engagement and the desire to be dangerous, to enhance the risk to operations such that countries might reduce their military operations in what China considers their sphere of influence is definitely something that Xi Jinping promotes. On the Taiwan issue, I will just say very quickly, my concerns with strategic clarity is it doesn't do anything for deterrence. My understanding of how the PLA and the party is thinking about Taiwan right now is they have to do worst case scenario planning. They have to assume the United States is going to try to intervene. So the main question is whether or not the United States has the capabilities to intervene. Saying you will do something doesn't actually say anything about whether or not you can. And I am concerned that it hurts capabilities because the United States is not a resident power in Asia. We rely on other countries for access basing and overflight. And if there is a conflict and it looks like in any way the United States started it, I think that makes it even more difficult for the United States to get kind of the access that it needs. So we are no longer in the position of power that we can, just the mere threat of U.S. intervention is enough to impose caution on China. So maybe strategic clarity would have had a huge impact, 20 years ago, but now I just don't see it. And I don't believe in the diversionary war type of thesis. I don't see any real evidence for that. Not only in like the Chinese, strategic culture, but also when I go to China and talk to the PLA and the party and we talk about the econ stuff. This was right after Biden had just given a speech saying China's not going to attack Taiwan because of economic problems. And the PLA had invited me because they were trying to convince me not to worry about Taiwan anymore. So focused on that, they're trying to convince me there was nothing there. But when I asked party leadership, what do you think of this Biden speech? It would have been the perfect opportunity for them to be like, you see, even Biden thinks because of economic issues, we're not going to do anything. But instead, they kind of think about it and they're like, yeah, the economics doesn't really impact any of this. So, I talk about in my book about how China has been able to compete. They started competing with the United States when their economy was smaller than France's. So even if they have 0% growth over the next 25 years, they'll still be the second largest economy. They'll still continue to create all these military challenges for us despite of it. So I think if things are really bad at home in China, they focus inward. They don't create any reason for people to take to the streets, even if it's initially in support.
I think given we've got three more, they were good
Anything else on
answers.
the CMC, on decision making?
I think the CMC matters far less under Xi. And I think this idea, the idea that he's signing individual orders is wrong, but he's communicated intent. Be prepared to fight and win, fight a war at a moment's notice, fight and win when you encounter foreign militaries, treat it like it's war because it's good practice, be part of struggle. Wolf warrior diplomacy is now not the diplomat's job, it's the PLA's job. And critically, no one has been sacked, demoted or moved because of these dangerous encounters. So the pattern is too obvious, and in today's China, what Xi Jinping has not licensed, he punishes. That's not happening here.
Okay. All right, we'll go see if we can get each of these so that we can get some sort of answer before our time's up.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Patrick Centeno. I'm with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, DC, and my question is specifically for Ms. Wang. So you mentioned earlier that one of the greatest issues in Philippines' foreign policy against China, with China, is the change in administrations and their different takes on the foreign policy. However, there is similarity between President Aquino III and current President Marcos Jr. What would you say is the key difference between their foreign policy, and do you believe that President Marcos Jr.'s foreign policy can solidify a more stable policy that can persist for the next administrations in terms of deterring PLA aggression? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jonah Bach. I'm also with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, DC. I apologize for monopolizing these two questions. Mr. Shoebridge, my question is for you. In the report, you argued that Australian regional partners should not pursue a waterfront strategy of challenging China in all areas, but should focus on key areas like the Second Thomas Shoal, as you mentioned. to obtain momentum and change the trajectory. What do you think happens after Australian regional partners have succeeded in that and achieved that momentum? Do they keep going forward with it? And if so, how can you prevent any escalatory spirals from that? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie Pope. I'm with the International Trade Administration, and I'm curious about your guys' perspectives on the contribution of the US and Australia, even unintentionally, to China's military decision-making, and as democracies, the responsibility that we can maybe take for their perspective, and in what ways going forward we can emphasize the point you guys were making that it is not about China, it's just about their behavior, how we can make that more clear to them going forward. Thank you.
All right, let's try to sneak this last one in. Let's see.
Hi, this is Xiaoshan, I'm a reporter with the VOA Mandarin. I have two questions. The first one is, we know the World War I occurred in 1914 with the death of the Austrian official, and recently Junior Marco said the death of Filipino citizen would be considered a war, act of war. So is the South China Sea becoming a more likelier flashpoint for conflict with China than Taiwan Strait now? What would be your key policy recommendation for U.S. and its regional allies to take to stop us from sleepwalking into World War III in the South China Sea? And the second question is on Australia. So in the report, Mr. Shoebridge seemed to paint a very worrisome trend that the current Australia administration is taking a less principled and softer approach in exposing and challenging China's provocative behavior. Would their current approach put more Australian personnel and military people at risk, their life at risk? And if a war occurred in the South China Sea with China, what would be the role played by the Australian military in that scenario? Thanks.
All right, so we have a few. I'm afraid we're really up against time. The last one ended up in 2 questions, so. We have a few on the Philippines, and then a few for Michael, and then we'll ask others to pitch in between.
All right, okay, I can just respond first. It's really an interesting question about the difference between the Aquino and the Marcos administration's attitude towards China. It's ironic because Aquino and Marcos families are really, mortal enemies before, and now they have a lot of similarities in terms of how they deal with China. I guess there's not a lot of big difference. It's just that I think Aquino paved the way for the Marcos administration to at least have a legal basis on how the Philippines should hold China accountable because of what Aquino did by filing the arbitration case in 2013, and then with that victory, the legal victory that the Philippines had, at least Aquino gave a gift to Marcos. There's a legal basis now on how we should hold China accountable now. And probably during this Marcos administration, there's more publication of incidents at sea. Aside from recording it, we are now publicizing it frequently in the media now to encourage other countries to move towards collective action against China. And also the expansion of strategic partnership, I think that's more active in the Marcos administration now. So we have strategic partnership with Australia now, with Japan, more military exercise with the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with the US. And also to answer the last question about the South China Sea, yes, President Marcos said that about if there is a death of a Filipino fisherman or a death of a Filipino soldier, it would trigger the Mutual Defense Treaty. It might trigger escalation or conflict between Philippines and China. I think it's not probably the reason why there's tension there is because the South China Sea incidents are susceptible to miscalculation. I don't know if China would see South China Sea as a priority compared to the issue with Taiwan, but South China Sea incidents at sea, it's more vulnerable to miscalculation. So there's a lot of tension in that area. So yeah, that's it.
Right, so lots of questions for me, but I would say the first one, if we do something, say, second Thomas Scholl, to show that Chinese policy fails, what happens next? Well, I think we look for other opportunities to show Chinese policy fails. So China's very opportunistic. What's wrong with us being very opportunistic? And I love the question because it's saying, if we have a success, should we worry about that? Well, I would like to have some success in reversing Chinese incremental control. That's a lovely problem to have. The one about Australian government policy, I think there is a problem. I didn't mention it in my earlier remarks, but the Australian government adopted a policy of not commenting on incidents between the Australian and Chinese militaries in 2022. In fact, they said they don't comment on these for operational security reasons. That only changed when that diver was injured, and I think that incident could not be disclosed. So the good thing is the Chinese helped break that bad policy, because in a democracy, not telling your public what's happening doesn't give you a sustainable policy platform. And the other thing is it lets the Chinese narrative about how they're a peace-loving power that only wants good things for the region stand uncontested, whereas Taiwan, the Philippines, the US, Australia, publicising what China's military is actually doing is a powerful counter-narrative. That's what I would say about those.
Right.
I'll just quickly comment on the question regarding, how do we frame this in our engagement with China. And I think it's very, very important that we, while of course doing what we can to strengthen our military capabilities and our deterrent, and working closely with allies and partners in doing that, I think we also need to be careful in doing so, because that precisely plays into China's preferred narrative, that America's the troublemaker, America and its allies are representative of bloc mentality and intend to contain China's rise, which is simply not true. But that means that the United States and its partners need to think beyond a strictly military response to China, so that we're not playing directly into that narrative. And a part of that is going to have to include working with other partners in the region who are not treaty allies of the United States, who share concerns about the PLA's increasingly aggressive behavior. For example, with India or with Vietnam, potentially with Malaysia or Singapore or Indonesia even. Because the more we can make clear that this is not a US allied problem, but is actually a more region-wide problem, I think the better the message will be conveyed into Beijing, that this is not simply driven by the hegemonists in Washington. Easier said than done, clearly, but I think it's something that this very process is represented here, I think has helped to catalyze.
Last words.
I'll try not to get too professorial, but World War I was not caused because an archduke was assassinated. The origins of World War I were the fact that you had many entities that had revisionist territorial ambitions coupled with massive military buildups in which technology had the offense, and so there was incentive to move first. I'm much more with the Chinese strategic thinking on this inadvertent escalation point. Taiwan is still more dangerous because China will not fight a war right now in the South China Sea, and they won't do it because they will lose. And they know they will lose. They can't project power across those kinds of distances yet. When I talk to the PLA, they say the only reason they haven't declared internal waters in the Spratlys is because there's no way they could enforce that. So it is a capabilities question. So I think if there were any sort of accident, the Chinese would de-escalate that at that point. They wouldn't want to go toe-to-toe with the United States and the Philippines in the South China Sea. They do have a local, in many cases, military advantage across the Taiwan Strait. They believe they do. I think they're right, so that's just a calculation. That's not a miscalculation. And so I still think Taiwan is more dangerous.
Wonderful. Well, Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists. And thank all of you for sticking with us. We're slightly over time, so bear with me for just a few more seconds. Once again, thank you so much, Ambassador Myler, for joining us, for staying through all of this. I appreciate that as well, and for our contributions to today's event. Before we transition to lunch, which is going to be just outside here, I'd like to take a moment to ask everybody to scan the QR code, which I'm supposed to say is behind me, but I don't see one yet. There will be a QR code to complete a quick survey for the event. There it is. So take out your phones, pull it up, click it. It's really short. It would really help us a lot. We're always looking for feedback to understand if the things, as was mentioned, the things we're writing are reaching the audiences and the type of impact they might be having. So please, if you have a few seconds, fill that out. We're really grateful for any feedback you have. So after you do that, lunch is served just outside over here, so make your way there. And there are some printed copies of the report there if you haven't had a chance to grab them. And we also have PDF copies available online if that's your preferred way of reading them. So thank you once again, everybody, for joining. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.